You're listening to HowStreet.com radio, available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. Welcome to HowStreet.com radio, the online source for market opinions. Here is Jim Goddard.
My guest is David Smith, senior analyst for the Morgan Report, which you can find online at silver-investor.com. Welcome to the show, David.
Good to be back, Jim.
You were mentioning people tend to look at precious metals as something you guard against bad news with. Is it still viable for that?
All the things that we've looked at the metals for as a bad news situation are still there, with government running deficits and with increasing inflation and the potential for global conflicts. But I think there are some new elements that have actually been bubbling under the surface for quite a while. But I think the year 2014, the current year we're talking, going out over the next few years, are going to be playing an increasingly big role that's going to add to the bad news metal aspect. This is more of a good news metal. It depends on which side of the fence you're on. But there's several elements that I think are going to really push prices higher because of the question about just how much supply is going to be out there to meet the increasing demand.
I know the juniors, the ones who go out and explore for new precious metals, have been drastically underfunded the last few years. They just don't have the resources to go out and find new mines. What are we going to do if they don't?
Well, the better ones are going to be snapped up by the majors. There's no doubt about that. But there aren't that many good finds out there, and the big projects are having increasing difficulty ever seeing the light of day. There was a massive project that was canceled pretty much up in Alaska here over the last 6 or 8 months, with two major companies pulling out because it was untenable to be developed, and that potentially had about 60 million ounces of gold in it. They'd had to move half the state to dig it up, but it's a big project that doesn't likely to see the light of day. That's just one of several big projects that are not going to come on stream anytime soon, if at all.
And, of course, Pascua Lama in South America, $11 billion spent, and not a penny out of it yet.
Right, and that's going to be interesting to see how that evolves over the next few years. But, you know, an aspect of the demand that just keeps on going, and it's kind of under the radar because it's not in the best interest of these countries to tell you exactly what they're doing, but Russia and China are taking increasing steps as members of the BRICS coalition to, if not replace the U.S. dollar as a reserve currency, certainly come up with a situation where there's direct competition, and eventually it could make the U.S. dollar just become first among equals rather than Lord of the Rings, so to speak. And I think that both countries are producing and stockpiling much more gold than they're saying that they are, and they're going to use this as a gold-backed de facto backing to their currency over the next few years.
Didn't they make an agreement between China and Russia over the weekend to improve trade and use their own currencies or someone else's currencies except the U.S. to facilitate that trade?
They have, and they've been increasing barter situations going on between these countries, and that's going to become a bigger and bigger deal, I believe, as we move forward. Another wealth element that is going to be a good news aspect for gold and silver is the increasing affluence of India. There are indications that the presidential election, the prime minister election, which will be pretty much announced sometime in the next week or so, the results of that are going to put an individual in the head of the things, which will be much less involvement with corruption and more transparency and more friendly to business interests. And the Indian economy is showing really strong signs of improving, and Indians are going to be buying gold and silver as they have more money for disposable income.
Now, their government over the past couple of years drastically restricted the import of gold, and all that did was make gold the most smuggled item, surpassing drugs by billions of dollars.
You're absolutely correct, Jim, and that became a big situation. It also caused a massive spike in demand for silver. And so these two metals are going to continue to be on the radar screen and people want to acquire them. And if you take the longer view of what's going on, I think you're going to be very happy to accumulate yourself as your particular financial conditions warrant.
Can the people of India afford it? Have they been hoarding money just for this moment to happen where they could buy gold again?
Well, that might be part of it, but I think the fact is because their economy is improving and the wealth effect of a billion people is going to really drive this forward. So, again, supply questions looming constantly as we go forward. demand question's only a question of how much demand, not if. And so that's really going to be a big driver in all three of these respects right now and moving on forward, bigger and bigger factors to consider.
If India decides that it's going to allow rampant gold imports once again, China's been doing this for the last 5 years, what's that going to do for somebody else trying to find physical gold?
It's just going to introduce more stress into the supply side situation and causing the price to rise and the spreads to increase, and all around just continue the process which was begun at the beginning of the century as we move into the intermediate to later stages of this gold and silver secular bull market.
If the price of gold goes high enough, will it help revive the junior miners who do the exploration?
It definitely will, and they're the ones that are going to be feeding the pipeline for the majors. In fact, it's interesting that there have been several cases recently indicating that the majors are starting to put more money into simply buying resources that they already know have been pretty much delineated, as opposed to going out and looking for them from scratch. And I think you're going to see more and more of that taking place. And you know, Jim, when this happens, usually a stock that is taken over a mining company by a major will increase the very next day by an average of about 35%. So holding on to these companies that you know really have the goods in the ground, so to speak, sooner or later they're going to become targets, and there might even be a bidding war, and that can sometimes cause a price rise of a doubling of the junior stock as two majors battle over who gets it. I think you're going to see more and more of that, so that action is going to be in the arena of taking over deposits that have already been delineated and less about going out and digging from scratch. There'll be some of that, and there may even be some large discoveries made, but most of the visible action, I think, for the intermediate term will be in the situation of the majors taking over the juniors.
Barrick Gold is looking at class action suits in both Canada and the U.S. over the way they've dealt with Pascua Lama. What does that do to the overall industry, or is it just a very specific thing for Barrick?
I think it's specific for Barrick, but it's emblematic of what happens when you have a large project that has any kind of a political issue going on. And so these things are going to continue cropping up, and it's going to be continual headaches for the majors.
Do the minor players find that problem, or because they're smaller, they're more sensitive? They'll go in locally and talk to Aboriginal people, talk to stakeholders in the area, communities who are worried about the possible pollution effects or using up all their water supplies as they are in South America. Do the smaller guys sometimes have an advantage, maybe a little more sensitive, a little more individual?
They can, but there have been examples where they've made egregious mistakes too in terms of communicating with the locals. The point is, whether they're large or small, any project they have in mind has a footprint, and it's as much about how they go about selling what they want to do and getting the buy-in from the locals as it is about the reality of how it's going to be developed over time.
Well, I guess that old gold rush mentality, just stomp all over the locals, just doesn't work anymore.
Oh no, that belongs to a bygone era for sure.
Funny, but some of the guys who believe in that are still around, and they still think it works. I think they're sadly mistaken.
Yep, they're dinosaurs.
David, also one thing I want to know about China, Russia, India. India and China negotiated a free trade deal some time ago, and I know they were in negotiations about perhaps getting a common currency. Have you heard anything more on that?
Not lately, but I think they're going to continue with their surreptitious means of using gold to back their currency. More bartering going on and more transferability of their currencies amongst themselves and other new partners.
Thanks a lot for chatting with us, David.
Very good, Jim. Talk to you later.
My guest has been David Smith, Senior Analyst for the Morgan Report, which you can find online at silver-investor.com. You're listening to HowStreet.com Radio. Find us on Twitter at TalkDigitalNet. Comments about the show can be sent to info@HowStreet.com. I'm Jim Goddard.